Why did he smile like that, as if he knew something the rest of them did? The morning air outside Buckingham Palace was crisp, almost too clean for a city that never slept. Tourists lined the black iron fences, their phones raised, their chatter a dull hum beneath the weight of the ceremony about to unfold. To them, this was just a spectacle: scarlet tunics, bearskin hats, the march of boots in perfect synchronization. But for her, it was the first day back in a city that once hated her for leaving, and now might never forgive her for returning. Captain Elena Harrow stood just beyond the shadow of the Victoria Memorial, a plain trench coat hiding the outline of the pistol strapped beneath her arm. On paper, she was an advisor, a liaison between MI5 and a foreign task force. In truth, she was something neither side could easily define: a soldier who had walked away and a ghost they had called back. She hadn't been this close to the palace since the day they folded a flag and handed it to her mother. She still remembered the sound, the slow, deliberate steps of the Queen's guard, the silence of their faces as she cried into that piece of cloth. That was the day she promised herself she would never break again. And yet here she was, her pulse too loud in her ears, her fingers tapping nervously inside her coat pocket. "Ma'am," said a voice through her earpiece, "we've got movement, north approach, he's here." Elena's eyes flicked toward the gates. There he was. The visitor. At first glance he was just another tourist: baseball cap, khaki shorts, a camera swinging from his neck. But there was something off, too measured, too aware. He didn't look around like the others. He scanned, calculated, and then he did it. He stepped forward, right into the path of the Queen's guard. The crowd gasped, phones rising higher. A few laughed, some cheered. The guards didn't flinch. They never did. One of them, taller, broader, and impossibly still, advanced with deliberate steps. The heel of his boot struck the cobblestones like the tick of a metronome. The visitor smirked, waved his hand inches from the guard's stoic face, even mimicked his march with exaggerated gestures. The guard didn't blink. Elena's hand drifted toward the inside of her coat. "Tell me we've got a name," she murmured. "Not yet," replied the voice. Facial recognition struggling. He's masked his features somehow. She cursed under her breath. Of course he had. This wasn't some internet prankster chasing views. This was deliberate, a test, a probe. And in that moment, as the crowd's laughter turned to awkward silence, Elena saw it. A brief exchange. A folded slip of paper pressed from the man's palm to the cuff of the guard's sleeve. So subtle that most would miss it. But she didn't. "Contact confirmed," she said. "We have a pass." "Orders." "Follow him." The man turned away, blending into the tide of tourists. Elena moved with him, her steps matching the ebb and flow of the crowd. He moved confidently, almost too much so, like he knew the cameras wouldn't follow here, like he knew someone was already tailing him. She quickened her pace. Then for the first time he looked back, right at her. Their eyes met and she froze. It wasn't recognition that flashed across his face. It was something worse. Amusement. He knew exactly who she was. And that meant one thing: this wasn't a mission compromised. This was a trap. The next seconds blurred. A cyclist swerved. A delivery van slammed to a stop. The man vanished between two buildings before her team could lock the perimeter. Elena darted after him, heart hammering, breath cutting short as she rounded the corner and found nothing. He was gone. Only the wind moved between the brick alley walls. "Target lost," she hissed into her mic. "Copy that, we're sweeping CCTV." "Don't bother, he's too good for cameras." She leaned against the damp wall, steadying herself. The smell of rain on stone, the distant rumble of London traffic, it all pressed in on her. This wasn't just a breach. It was a message. They knew she was here. They wanted her to know they knew. And somewhere, deep down, a voice she'd spent years trying to silence whispered the truth she didn't want to face. This isn't about the mission. This is about you. But that night, the city was quieter than she remembered. She sat alone in a secure MI5 operations room, the glow of surveillance monitors painting her face in pale blue light. Her team filtered in one by one, their voices a mix of concern and frustration. "Ma'am," said Agent Patel, dropping a folder on the table, "we found something." A still frame, a zoomed-in image from a CCTV feed 2 blocks from the palace. The man was there, face obscured, hands empty, but behind him a second figure lingered. A woman, watching from a distance. The time stamp matched the moment he disappeared. Elena studied the image carefully. There was something familiar in that posture, something she couldn't place and didn't want to. "Run her face," she said. "We did, no match." "Try again." "Ma'am, we've run it through every database." She stared at the grainy figure on the screen, her throat tight. If the system couldn't find her, that meant one thing. "She's off the grid," Elena whispered, "like me." A silence settled over the room. It wasn't unusual for foreign intelligence to operate inside London, but this felt different, personal, precise. "Could be ex-agency," Patel offered. "Could be one of ours gone rogue." "Or," Elena said, voice low, "someone who remembers me." She turned off the monitor and walked toward the window, the lights of the city stretching endlessly below. She'd been running from her past for 5 years, from the mistake that cost her team their lives, from the mission no one spoke about anymore. And now, it seemed, the past had finally come looking. But why now? And why here? She didn't have answers, only a growing suspicion that the disrespectful visitor wasn't just mocking a soldier's composure. He was daring her to break hers. But the next morning the rain returned, thin, cold, relentless. Elena walked the perimeter of the palace grounds under a gray sky, her steps slow and deliberate. The guards stood where they always stood, unflinching, unmoving, unshakable. She stopped before one of them, the same soldier who'd received the note. His eyes never shifted. His jaw remained locked, but his fingers, tucked against the hilt of his rifle, twitched once, a subtle, deliberate motion. She waited until the tourists moved past. Then, carefully, she reached down and adjusted her shoe just long enough to see it. The slip of paper, still tucked neatly against the guard's cuff. She slid it free, hiding it in her palm before walking away. In the privacy of a maintenance corridor, she unfolded the note. Only 4 words were written inside, in a hand she hadn't seen in half a decade. "We know the truth." Her breath caught. No signature, no demand, no clue. Just a sentence, and a storm that had been waiting 5 years to break. And in that moment, Elena realized something she hadn't felt in a long time: fear. Not of the enemy, not of the mission, but of the past she thought she'd buried. Because whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the Queen's Guard, still, silent, unbreakable, suddenly felt less like a symbol of discipline and more like a warning. Don't move, don't react, don't show them what's coming. But she knew they already knew, and soon the whole world would too. The paper shook slightly in her hand, not because of the cold, though the London rain had a way of slipping under skin, but because of what those 4 words meant. We know the truth. The truth, the one she had spent 5 years burying under layers of false reports, sealed files, and sleepless nights. The one that still woke her at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, replaying the explosion again and again, the screaming, the silence, the blood. Elena folded the note back into her coat pocket, her heartbeat steadying into the slow, deliberate rhythm she'd trained for. Whatever this was, whoever was behind it, they wanted her off balance. And that meant only one thing: she needed to act before they did. "Patel," she said into her calm, her voice low, "I've got something. I'll brief you in person." She left the palace grounds without another glance at the guards, those silent statues of discipline. Their composure was absolute, untouchable, and right now it was the only thing keeping her from breaking. The MI5 field office on Vauxhall Bridge was a maze of glass and steel, all sharp corners and sterile hallways. It had been years since she'd walked through its doors. Faces turned as she passed, some curious, some cautious, some hostile. They knew who she was. They knew what had happened in Damascus. And they knew she didn't belong here anymore. Patel was waiting for her in a secure conference room, a stack of files under his arm. He looked younger than he was, too eager, too clean. He hadn't yet learned that intelligence work wasn't about answers. It was about knowing which questions to stop asking. "Ma'am," he said, closing the door behind them. "We cross-referenced the handwriting on the note. No match in any domestic or foreign database. Whoever wrote this, they've never been caught before." "Of course they haven't," Elena murmured, placing the note on the table. "And they won't be, because they're not trying to hide." Patel frowned, meaning. "They want me to know it's them. This isn't a warning, it's an invitation." He glanced down at the message again. An invitation to what? To finish what we started. Silence filled the room, heavy, uncertain. "Do you think this is connected to Damascus?" Patel finally asked. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said everything. 5 years earlier. Damascus, Syria, Operation Glass Lantern. The sandstorm hit harder than predicted. Visibility was down to 15 meters, comms were patchy, and the convoy carrying the defected scientist was already 2 hours late. Elena had begged command to delay the extraction. They'd refused. "Time-sensitive," they'd said. "No room for error." There was always room for error. It just wasn't theirs to care about. Her unit, 9 operators, hand-picked and battle-tested, had taken position around the safe house. The scientists' intel could end a war before it began. It was worth everything. Worth their lives. Worth her career. Worth the blood already spilled. But someone had betrayed them. The first RPG struck the west wall. The second tore through the vehicle. Screams filled the air, chaos, confusion, betrayal. She remembered dragging Sergeant Cole's body from the debris, his face barely recognizable. She remembered firing blind into the smoke, calling for backup that never came. And she remembered her, the woman with the scar across her cheek, standing calmly in the alleyway as the safe house burned. Their eyes had met for a split second before the blast waved through Elena into the street. That was the moment the mission died, and with it 5 good people. The inquiry had called it unforeseen enemy intelligence. Command called it an acceptable loss, but Elena knew better. Someone on the inside had sold them out, and the scarred woman, the ghost in every nightmare since, had been the delivery. "Ma'am," Patel's voice pulled her back to the present. Elena exhaled slowly. "We need to assume this isn't just about the visitor or the note. This is connected to Damascus. They're back." "Who's back?" "I don't know, but I know where we'll find them." By dusk, Elena was standing in the rain-slick alley behind an abandoned textile warehouse in East London. It was one of those places only people with secrets used, no cameras, no patrols, no reason for anyone to be there. And yet, every instinct screamed trap. She waited. And waited. Then footsteps. A figure stepped out from the shadows, not the man from the palace, but someone else. Older, familiar. His hands raised slightly, palms open. "Hello, Captain Harrow," he said with a faint smile. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," Elena replied. "You were supposed to be in prison." "Good behavior," he shrugged. "Besides, I never liked the title arms dealer. I prefer facilitator." Ramai had it. The man who'd sold weapons to both sides in half a dozen conflicts, and the one whose intel had once saved her life in Aleppo. They had history, complicated history. "What do you want?" she asked. "To warn you." "About?" "The people you're hunting," He stepped closer. They're not just after revenge, Elena. They want exposure. They want the truth, your truth, to burn. Her jaw tightened. They don't have proof. Oh, they don't need proof. They have something better. He tossed a small flash drive onto the ground between them. Footage from Damascus, never before seen, never meant to exist. Elena stared at the drive. Where did you get this? Doesn't matter. What matters is what's on it. And once it's released, you won't be the only one running. Why are you helping me? Because chaos is bad for business. He turned to leave but paused. Oh, and one more thing, that visitor you're chasing, he's not your enemy. Then who is? The woman, the one with the scar, she's here. And just like that, he vanished back into the rain. Elena's mind raced as she drove back through the city. The scarred woman, the betrayal, the footage. It was all converging faster than she could prepare for. And worst of all, it wasn't about her anymore. If the footage went public, it wouldn't just destroy her, it would compromise every agent, every mission, every life connected to that operation. She pulled over at a quiet overlook of the Thames, rain blurring the lights of Westminster across the water. Her reflection stared back from the glass, older, harder, but still hiding the same guilt. We know the truth. What if they did? What if the world saw what really happened that night? Not the sanitized version in the report, but the truth. That the call to proceed had been hers. That the convoy had walked into an ambush because she'd ignored the delay warnings. That 5 people were dead because she believed she was untouchable. Could she live with that? Did she deserve to? Ma'am, Patel's voice crackled through her calm. We've got something. CCTV picked up the scarred woman near King's Cross 30 minutes ago. Elena's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Send the coordinates, she said. I'm going. King's Cross was a labyrinth of light and movement, commuters rushing home, trains clattering beneath steel arches, rain dripping from the vaulted glass roof. It was the perfect place to disappear, and an even better place to make a statement. Elena moved through the crowd like a shadow, eyes scanning every corner, every reflection. Then she saw her leaning casually against a support pillar, a paper coffee cup in one hand, eyes locked directly on Elena. For 5 years that face had haunted her. Now it was real, flesh and blood, and smiling. Elena approached slowly, hand close to her weapon. You should have stayed dead. Where's the fun in that? The woman said, her accent soft, deliberate. I told them you'd come. Who's them? You'll see soon enough. Why the note? Why the games? Because you're not ready for the truth yet, but you will be. Elena's patience snapped. You killed my team. The woman's smile faded. No, Captain, you killed your team. We just cleaned up the mess. Before Elena could respond, the woman dropped the coffee cup. The splash drew Elena's gaze, and in that split second the woman melted into the crowd. Gone again. Target moving, Elena shouted. All units converge. But it was too late. By the time backup arrived, the trail was cold. And in the place where the woman had been standing, a small folded card lay on the ground. 4 words. Different handwriting. Different ink. The guard will fall. Elena stared at the message under the neon glow of the station lights. This was no longer just about her past. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, they were coming for something bigger. The guard, the crown, the very symbol of composure and control. And this time, silence would not protect them. She slipped the card into her pocket and walked into the rain, her reflection fractured in the wet pavement. They thought she was still that woman from Damascus, broken, haunted, afraid. But they were wrong. This time, she wasn't running from the past. She was hunting it. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed against the rooftops of London like a metronome, steady and relentless, the same way her thoughts hammered against the inside of her skull. The guard will fall. Those 4 words echoed louder than any gunshot she'd ever heard. They weren't a threat, they were a promise. And the people behind them weren't amateurs. They were patient, coordinated, and they had no intention of missing their mark this time. Elena stood on the balcony of her flat overlooking the Thames, the city lights fractured in the rain-slick glass. She hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the scarred woman's face in the crowd, that smirk, that certainty. They were playing a game, and they were winning. Her comm unit buzzed on the table inside. Patel again. She ignored it. He'd called 6 times already, and there was nothing new he could tell her. Intelligence needed time, and time was the one thing she didn't have. She turned the card over in her fingers. The paper was cheap, the ink standard, nothing traceable. But the handwriting told her everything. It wasn't the same as the note she'd received before. This was a different person, a different message, which meant there were at least 2 people involved, probably more. And if they had infiltrated this far already. The knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Who is it?" "Patel," came the muffled reply. "We have a situation." She opened the door, and the look on his face told her everything. "What happened?" He didn't answer, just handed her a tablet. The live feed was shaky, filmed on a phone, but the image was clear. The Queen's Guard outside St. James's Palace, and one of them on his knees, weapons stripped, uniform stained with blood. The crowd was screaming. Security was rushing in. And across the bottom of the screen, a message scrolled in bold red text. "Your symbols WILL bleed." Elena's stomach twisted. When was this? 20 minutes ago. Any casualties? 1 guard alive but critical. 2 tourists injured. The attackers vanished before units could respond. And the scarred woman. No visual confirmation, but this was planned, coordinated. Elena shoved the tablet back into his hands. They're escalating. They're not just sending messages anymore. They're dismantling everything that stands for composure and control. "Ma'am," Patel said carefully, "Command is asking if we should pull the guard from public duty." "No," her voice was ice. "That's what they want, panic, fear. We hold our ground." He hesitated. "Then what's the plan?" "The plan," she said, slipping on her coat, "is to make them think we're still reacting while we hunt them." By dawn, a citywide task force had formed. MI5, Special Branch, Counterterror, and a handful of foreign agents Elena didn't trust, all operating under her coordination. It was chaos, but controlled chaos, and that was the only way she knew how to function. 3 separate claims of responsibility so far, Patel reported in the briefing room. All fake. None of them lead anywhere. "They're ghosts," said Agent Bayan, a grizzled veteran from domestic counterintel. "Whoever they are, they're better funded and better organized than any cell we've seen." "They're not a cell," Elena muttered. "They're something else." Bayan frowned. "And you know this how?" "Because they're not trying to destroy the system. They're trying to humiliate it, piece by piece." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Attacks like this weren't meant to kill, they were meant to break trust. And once the public lost faith in the Guard, the Crown, the institutions, the rest would fall like dominoes. Patel leaned forward. "We found something in the footage from St. James's. A symbol painted on the curb before the attack. 4 concentric circles." Elena's eyes widened. "I know that mark." "From where?" "Glass lantern, Damascus." The room shifted. Faces exchanged glances. Someone cursed under their breath. "You're saying this is the same group?" "I'm saying," she said slowly, "that the people who betrayed us in Damascus have resurfaced, and they're finishing what they started." The rain turned to a fine mist as she walked along the mall later that evening. The cleanup crews had already scrubbed the blood from the cobblestones, but the memory lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Tourists were gone now. replaced by plainclothes agents and armed security watching every shadow. It should have made her feel safer. It didn't. She stopped where the guard had fallen, staring at the faint outline of where his blood had pooled. Her chest tightened. Discipline, control, composure. That's what the guard was supposed to stand for, but even stone cracked under enough pressure. "You blame yourself, don't you?" The voice came from behind her, low, familiar, and wrapped in too much history. "Colonel Ross," she said without turning. I wondered how long it would take. He stepped up beside her, older now, his once dark hair streaked with silver. He'd been her commanding officer in Damascus, the one who'd signed the report that buried the truth. "Still trying to fix things you didn't break," he said quietly. "They were my fault. 5 people died, Elena, and maybe one of those deaths was on you, but the rest, that was war." She shook her head. "No, that was betrayal, and I ignored the signs." Ross studied her profile for a long moment. "You're not going to stop until you find them, are you?" "No. And when you do—" She looked back toward the palace gates, where the guard stood motionless against the encroaching night. "Then they'll learn what happens when you try to break something that doesn't bend." It happened 2 nights later. An intercepted message, encrypted, time-sensitive, and routed through 4 proxy networks, contained a single line: "The Crown will kneel on October 14." It was a date 3 days away. Elena's task force went into overdrive. Surveillance intensified. Communications were monitored. Every possible target, from Buckingham to Westminster to the Tower, was placed under heavy watch. But deep down, Elena knew it wouldn't matter. These people didn't announce their plans to be stopped. They announced them so that when they succeeded, the humiliation would be even greater. She stared at the board of potential strike locations late into the night, the glow of the screens casting long shadows across the room. Something didn't add up. The message, the timing, the wording, kneel. They weren't planning to destroy the crown. They were planning to force it to submit. Then it hit her. "Patel," she said suddenly, "pull the guard's ceremonial schedule for the 14th. He blinked. "Why?" "Just do it." He typed quickly. The schedule appeared on the screen: changing of the guard, parade, state procession rehearsal, and one more entry buried at the bottom of the list: private audience with the defense minister. Inside the palace. No cameras, no press, limited security. And every senior guard officer present. Her blood ran cold. It's not the ceremony, it's the meeting. "They're going after the command structure," Patel whispered. "They're going after the head of the guard." The hours that followed were a blur. Reinforcements were called in. Access points were sealed. Plainclothes officers were embedded inside the palace itself. And Elena, for the first time since Damascus, found herself back in the field, not behind a desk, but in the shadows of a mission that felt far too familiar. The morning of the 14th arrived gray and silent. The palace hummed with nervous energy. Guards stood at triple strength. Drones patrolled the sky. Snipers took positions across nearby rooftops. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling they were missing something. "Any chatter?" she asked over comms. "Nothing, quiet as a grave." "Too quiet," she muttered. And then the lights went out. For 3 seconds the entire palace plunged into darkness. Backup power kicked in, alarms blared, but by then they were already inside. Gunfire erupted near the west corridor. Screams echoed through the hall. Security scrambled, comms flooded with overlapping orders. Elena sprinted toward the chaos, weapon drawn. Through the smoke and confusion she caught glimpses: black uniforms, suppressed weapons, masks. Not a suicide mission, a surgical strike. She ducked behind a marble column, breath steady, pulse calm. The enemy was moving toward the council chamber, toward the officers. "Not on her watch." "2 targets northwest," Patel's voice crackled. one heading your way. She moved like muscle memory, silent steps, controlled breath. As the first operative rounded the corner, she struck, a clean takedown. The second fired wildly, she returned 2 shots, center mass. Down. And then she saw her. Scar across her cheek, calm as ever, walking through the gunfire like it was rain. "Elena," she called, voice cutting through the chaos. "I told you, the guard will fall." "Not today." The woman smiled. "Today isn't about killing them." "Then what is it?" "It's about showing them that even their strongest defenders bleed." Before Elena could fire, the woman tossed a small device down the corridor. A flash, a shockwave, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, the council chamber doors were wide open. And inside, on the polished marble floor, lay the commander of the Queen's Guard, alive, but on his knees, hands bound, a message painted across the wall behind him in bold crimson letters. "The fall has begun." Elena stood frozen, weapon trembling in her grip. They had breached the unbreachable, humiliated the untouchable, broken the unbreakable. And for the first time, she understood the terrible truth. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about dismantling everything she had sworn to protect piece by piece, symbol by symbol, until there was nothing left but ashes. And they were only getting started. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Elena's boots echoed through the corridor as she stepped into the council chamber, weapon raised, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. The room, once a sanctum of ceremony and power, now looked like the aftermath of a battlefield. Papers scattered, marble cracked, the heavy oak table overturned. And there, in the center of it all, the commander of the Queen's Guard knelt, wrists bound, his face pale and streaked with blood. The crimson words on the wall burned into her vision. "The fall has begun." "Clear the room," she shouted, snapping back into command mode. "Secure every exit, no one leaves, no one enters without my authorization." Agents flooded in, weapons sweeping corners, checking vitals, calling in medics. But Elena barely heard them. Her eyes were locked on the commander, on the slight tremor in his hands, the glassy look in his eyes. "Commander," she said quietly, kneeling beside him, "it's over, you're safe." His lips parted, but the words barely came. "Not over." "Don't speak, medics are on their way." He grabbed her wrist, surprising her with the strength of his grip. "You don't understand, this was never about me." Her blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Look." His eyes shifted past her, toward the overturned table, and only then did she see it. A small, blinking light tucked beneath the heavy wood. "Bomb," she yelled. Time slowed. Every instinct she'd ever trained for took over. She lunged forward, ripping the device free, tossing it across the chamber as far from the commander as possible. Patel and 2 agents dove for cover as the blast detonated, a concussive shockwave that shattered windows and knocked everyone to the ground. The world rang in her ears, her vision blurred, smoke filled the air. But it wasn't a high-yield explosive. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to broadcast. From somewhere above, maybe a drone, maybe a satellite, a signal pulsed outward. And moments later, across every newsfeed, every screen, every social platform in the UK, the same image appeared. The commander of the guard, bound and on his knees. "The fall has begun," scrawled behind him. And a masked figure speaking directly to the camera. "This is not the end," the voice said, calm and deliberate. "This is the beginning of truth. The symbols you worship are nothing but illusions built on lies, enforced by fear. Your empire stands on foundations of blood, and blood will bring it down." The feed cut, the silence returned. And with it, the weight of a nation's eyes turned toward the palace. The backlash was immediate. Within hours, protests erupted outside the palace gates. Conspiracy channels exploded with theories. Parliament demanded answers. The press tore into security failures. Opposition parties called for resignations. It was everything the attackers had wanted. This was psychological warfare, Patel muttered in the war room the next day. They didn't just breach the guard, they shattered public confidence. Elena stared at the footage on the screen, replaying, looping, each frame carving deeper into her gut. And they did it without firing a single bullet at a civilian. That's how you win a war without ever declaring one. Whoever they are, Bayan added grimly, they know how the system works. They know how people think. Because they were part of the system, Elena replied, her voice low. The room went still. You think they're former intelligence, Bayan said. I don't think, she said, I know. It made perfect sense. The precision, the timing, the psychological manipulation. This wasn't the work of radical ideologues or opportunistic extremists. This was the work of professionals, people who had once worn the same uniform, taken the same oath, and now sought to tear it all down. 2 days later, she got the proof she'd been waiting for. A dead drop in an alley off Brick Lane. A small envelope unmarked slipped into her pocket by an unknown hand. Inside, a flash drive. And on that drive, a single encrypted folder. She decrypted it with a key she hadn't used in years. A key that belonged to a classified op, long buried under layers of official denial. Operation Lantern, Patel read over her shoulder. This is restricted intelligence. How did they? Because they were there, Elena interrupted. They had clearance. They know the files, the codes, the operations we buried. She opened the video file. Grainy, timestamped from 7 years ago, Damascus, her unit, the failed extraction, the betrayal. And there, clear as day, the moment everything fell apart, the ambush, the massacre, the civilians caught in the crossfire. But this video was different. It didn't show what the official report said it did. It showed the truth, the part they had erased. It showed that the target wasn't a rogue faction. It was a British operative. And she was the one who pulled the trigger. Elena's breath caught in her throat. They have the footage. They're going to leak it, Patel whispered. No, she said, her voice hollow. They're going to use it. That night she sat alone in her flat, staring out at the city lights as the rain returned, heavier now, colder. Her hands shook as she replayed the footage over and over. She remembered that mission like it was yesterday. The orders were clear. The intel was certain. But the moment they breached the compound, everything went wrong. The hostile asset wasn't hostile. The safe house wasn't a cell. And the man she shot wasn't a terrorist. He was a diplomat. A father. And his death had set off a chain reaction that spiraled into years of unrest. The government buried it. The media never heard of it. And Elena, young, loyal, obedient, had done what she was told. She stayed silent. Now that silence was coming back to destroy everything. The next morning, Patel brought news she'd been dreading. They've made contact, he said, placing a burner phone on the table. Who? The group. They call themselves the Remnants. The phone rang before she could answer. A distorted voice spoke the moment she picked up. Hello, Agent Vega. Her heart skipped. How do you know that name? Because you used it in Damascus. Because you were the one who signed the after-action report. Because you were the one who pulled the trigger. Her grip tightened. What do you want? Nothing you can give. Nothing you can stop. Then why call? To give you a chance to watch. Watch what? The empire fall piece by piece, truth by truth. You see, this isn't about vengeance. It's about justice. And justice begins when lies end. Where are you? A soft laugh, closer than you think. The line went dead. 2 hours later, the first leak hit the web. The full, unedited footage from Operation Lantern, Elena's face, her voice, her actions, broadcast to millions. The truth they'd buried was now public record. And just like that, the narrative shifted. The Guard weren't protectors. They were executioners. Public outrage surged. Protests turned into riots. Politicians called for inquiries. And inside the palace, trust in the guard in Elena crumbled. She was pulled from command within 24 hours. Officially, they told her, this is temporary suspension pending investigation. Unofficially, it was exile. Patel found her sitting on a bench near the Thames that night, coat soaked from the rain, eyes hollow. "They're scapegoating you," he said gently. "They're not wrong," she murmured. "I did what they said I did." "You followed orders." "And that's the problem." He sat beside her in silence. "They're not done, you know. This was just the first strike." "I know." "Then what now?" Elena looked out over the dark water, the city lights flickering like dying stars. "Now I stop playing by their rules." The next move wasn't sanctioned. It wasn't official. It wasn't even legal. She assembled her own team, off-book, off-grid, people she trusted with her life. Patel, Bayan, two former operators from her Damascus unit. They had no insignias, no clearances, no oversight. Just a mission. Find the remnants, expose them, end them. Their first lead came from the unlikeliest of places, a defector. A young analyst from inside the group who'd grown disillusioned with their methods. He provided names, safe houses, encrypted channels. And one location. A warehouse on the outskirts of Birmingham. "Surveillance confirms movement," Patel reported as they geared up. "About a dozen inside. Light security, looks like a staging ground." "Then we move at midnight," Elena said, chambering a round into her rifle. "And this time we ended on our terms." The night was moonless, the rain relentless. Shadows clung to the warehouse walls like smoke. Elena crouched beside the entry door, heartbeat steady, finger resting lightly on the trigger. "This ends tonight." She signaled. Breach charges detonated silently. The door swung open. They moved in fast, fluid, precise. But the warehouse was empty. No weapons, no supplies, no operatives. Just a single chair in the center of the room. And on that chair, a laptop already streaming. The scarred woman's face appeared on screen, smiling faintly. "Welcome, Vega, right on schedule." Elena's blood froze. "It's a trap." "Not a trap," the woman said. "A message." "Where are you?" "Everywhere you're not looking." "Why go through all this trouble?" "Because I want you to understand something before the end. You think you're fighting for your country. You think you're defending order. But the truth is you're just another piece on the board. And we're the ones flipping it over." The screen went black. And then the charges detonated. The blast ripped through the warehouse, throwing Elena and her team to the ground. Concrete rained from above. Flames roared. They barely made it out alive. And as they stumbled into the rain-soaked night, coughing and bruised, Elena realized the awful truth. They weren't hunting the remnants. The remnants were hunting them. Smoke clung to her lungs like poison. Elena coughed hard as she stumbled out of the warehouse's jagged remains, rain slapping against her face in cold sheets. Every breath burned. Her ears rang with the aftershock of the explosion, and for a moment she wasn't sure if the ground was still shaking or if it was just her knees. "Patel," she yelled into the chaos, searching the scattered silhouettes of her team. "Here," his voice came from behind a stack of broken crates. He was limping, blood seeping through a tear in his sleeve, but alive. Bayan emerged next, dragging one of the ex-operators out of the fire with a desperate grunt. "Medic kit," Elena barked. Patel tossed her one, his hands trembling from adrenaline. "Everyone alive?" she asked. "Two wounded, no fatalities," Bayan replied, breathless. "But we're lucky. That was no small blast." Elena stared back at the inferno they'd walked into, the flames devouring steel, the gutted remains of what was supposed to be their first real strike against the remnants. Instead, it had been their humiliation. Again. The rain hissed as it hit the burning debris, and beneath the crackle and roar of the fire, Elena could still hear the woman's voice echoing from the laptop. "We're the ones flipping the board." She clenched her jaw. They weren't just chasing ghosts, the ghosts were setting the traps now. Every step Elena took, they seemed one ahead. Every lead she followed, they had already anticipated. And worst of all, they knew her. The debrief was brutal. Back in a safe house deep in the outskirts of London, the team gathered around a scarred wooden table. Maps and satellite photos lay scattered across it, half-burned gear tossed aside, and the faint buzz of encrypted radios filled the room. Patel nursed his bandaged arm. Bayan scrolled through intercepted comms. No one spoke for a long time until Elena finally broke the silence. "They knew we were coming," she said. Patel exhaled sharply. "They always do." No, this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a leak. They knew the exact time, the exact breach point, even our comm frequencies. "You're saying they're inside?" Bayan asked. Elena met his gaze. "I'm saying someone is feeding them everything." The thought hung in the air like smoke. No one wanted to say it, but they all felt the same sickening realization. The remnants had a mole. And if they had a mole, then nothing they'd planned was safe. "Start background checks again," Elena ordered. "On everyone, including old intel contacts. Anyone who's touched this operation in the last 6 months. I don't care how clean they look." "And if it's someone high up?" Patel asked. "Then we burn them, quietly." That night sleep didn't come. Elena sat alone by the window, the London skyline stretching dark and cold beyond the rain-smeared glass. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the warehouse, the fire, the blast, the way it all crumbled around them. She'd been here before. This kind of failure, this kind of humiliation. Damascus. The memory clawed its way back, the bad intel, the civilian casualties, the blood on her hands. And now it was happening all over again. She'd sworn she'd never repeat those mistakes, but here she was, walking straight into them. Her phone buzzed on the table. No number, no ID, just a single message. "How many more traps before you stop pretending you're the hero?" She stared at it, her pulse pounding in her throat. Another message followed seconds later. "We're not done, and neither are you." She deleted them, but the words burned into her brain. Whoever was on the other side of this, the woman with the scar, the voice that spoke of justice and truth, she wasn't just trying to break the system. She was trying to break Elena. 2 days later, a new crisis exploded, and this time it wasn't a trap. A Royal Intelligence convoy was ambushed outside Manchester. 5 dead, 3 missing. Among the missing, Dr. Michael Havers, a nuclear systems engineer with clearance to Britain's most sensitive weapons research. "They're escalating," Bayan said grimly, slamming the file down on the table. "This isn't psychological anymore. They're going after assets." "Are we sure it's them?" Patel asked. "They left a message," Bayan replied, pulling up a photo from the ambush site. Spray-painted across one of the armored vehicles were 3 words. "Truth before power. The remnants calling card." "This is it," Elena said, voice low but steady. "They're moving into their endgame, and if they get Havers, if they force him to build something, or worse, talk, they'll have leverage we can't stop." "So how do we find them?" Bayan asked. "We don't," Elena replied. "We make them come to us." The plan was risky, reckless, maybe even suicidal, but it was all they had. Elena recorded a message, a public statement, leaked to a journalist she knew the remnants monitored. In it, she revealed that she possessed evidence proving the group's leadership identities. Names, faces, locations, enough to dismantle them if released. And she promised to release it in 72 hours. It was a lie. She had nothing. But she was counting on their paranoia being stronger than their caution. If they believed she was a threat, they'd have no choice but to come after her, and when they did, she'd be ready. By nightfall, the bait was set. They came sooner than expected. 48 hours later, Elena's safe house perimeter alarm tripped at 2:17 a.m. She woke instantly, heart hammering, grabbing her sidearm and signaling the team. Patel and Bayan moved silently through the corridors, taking positions. Through the rain-soaked surveillance feed, dark shapes emerged from the alley, 6, maybe 7. Too disciplined for police, too precise for mercenaries. "They're here," Patel whispered. "Hold fire," Elena said. "Let them come." They breached the back door silently, military precision. Suppressed weapons. No wasted movement. Whoever they weren't amateurs. The first intruder stepped into the living room. Elena waited until he was 2 steps in, then fired. He dropped instantly, his rifle clattering across the floor. "Contact," Bayan yelled. The room exploded into chaos, suppressed gunfire, flashbangs, shouts in the dark. Elena moved like a ghost through the smoke, putting 2 rounds into the chest of another assailant before ducking behind the kitchen counter. But as the firefight raged, something felt wrong. Too few attackers, too cautious. And then she saw it, a small black device sliding across the floor toward her boots. "EMP," she shouted. The blast hit like a thunderclap. Lights died. Comms went dark. The safe house plunged into silence. And then she heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate. A woman's voice followed, calm, familiar. "Hello, Vega." The scarred woman stepped out of the shadows, rifle slung across her chest, no mask this time. Her eyes were cold, steady, almost disappointed. "I was hoping you'd be smarter than this," she said. "Who are you?" Elena demanded, weapon still raised. "You don't remember." A faint smile touched her lips. "7 years ago, Damascus, the extraction you botched, the man you shot." Elena's blood turned to ice. "You." "He was my brother." The woman stepped closer, each word a dagger. "He was trying to negotiate peace. He was the only one who could have stopped the bloodshed. And you, the obedient soldier, ended his life because your superiors told you to." Elena's hands shook, but she didn't lower the gun. "I didn't know." "No," the woman spat. "You didn't ask." Silence hung heavy between them. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. "This isn't about revenge anymore," the woman continued. "It's about consequences. You built a world on lies, and now those lies are collapsing. The people deserve the truth." "And what happens after?" Elena asked. "When you've burned everything down, what's left?" "Justice." "That's not justice," Elena said quietly. "That's vengeance wearing a mask." For the first time, the woman hesitated, just a flicker of doubt behind her cold stare. Then a sharp crack split the air, a gunshot from the hallway. The woman staggered back, blood blooming across her shoulder. Patel burst in, rifle up, firing again as the rest of the team stormed the room. "Go move," Bayan shouted. The woman disappeared into the smoke as quickly as she'd appeared, retreating through the shattered windows into the night. They gave chase, but by the time they reached the street, she was gone, swallowed by the rain and darkness once more. The aftermath was chaos. The safe house was compromised, their location blown, their mission in jeopardy, and worst of all, now Elena knew the truth. This wasn't just ideology. It wasn't just a war against institutions. It was personal. The Remnant's leader wasn't a nameless zealot. She was a woman whose brother Elena had killed, and who now sought to tear down the world that had made that possible. "Are you all right?" Patel asked as medics patched up her shoulder. "No," Elena said quietly, "but I will be." "Then what's next?" Bayan asked. She looked out the window, rain still falling over the city, harder now, colder. "They want justice," she said. "Then I'll give them the truth, all of it." And for the first time since this all began, Elena knew exactly what she had to do. She wasn't going to stop the remnants. She was going to expose the system that created them. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. London streets glistened under a gray sky, reflections of neon signs and sirens bleeding into puddles that never seemed to dry. Elena watched from the window of a rented flat, anonymous, unremarkable, far from the official channels she once commanded. It was the first time in her career she was operating without sanction. No orders, no oversight, no fallback. And for the first time, it felt like she was finally doing something real. "They're expecting us to chase them," Patel said from the table behind her, fingers dancing across an encrypted laptop. "More traps, more fake locations, more propaganda drops." "Good," Elena said, still watching the rain. "Let them think we're playing their game." "Then what's the move?" Bayan asked. "We don't go after the remnants," she said. "We go after what they're fighting against, the system that made them possible, the lies that fuel them." Bayan frowned. "That's not a mission, that's a revolution." "Call it whatever you want," Elena said, turning from the window. "They want the truth. We're going to give it to them on our terms." The plan she was about to set in motion would have ended her career, if she still had one. She called in old favors, people who owed her, people who believed the system needed cleansing as much as she did, files long sealed under national security, operations erased from public record, missions buried beneath 1,000 pages of redacted reports. Every one of them told a story of corruption, of cover-ups, of innocent blood spilled under the banner of security. "This one's from Kabul, 2013, Patel said, sliding a file across the table. "False flag op, 27 civilians killed, blamed on local insurgents." "And this," Bayan added, pulling up a classified memo. "Internal order to silence a whistleblower in 2017. Labeled her a traitor. She's still in prison." Elena flipped through page after page, a catalog of rot beneath the polished veneer of duty. "Once this goes public," Patel warned, "there's no coming back. They'll charge you with treason." "They already treat me like a criminal," Elena said quietly. "I'd rather be one for the right reason." They called it Operation Mirror. The goal wasn't to destroy the system. It was to strip it bare, to force the public to see it for what it was, and in doing so, rob the remnants of their greatest weapon, the illusion that they alone held the truth. The files were scheduled for release in 7 days, multiple drop points, distributed servers, mirror sites across 3 continents. If one went down, another would rise. But Elena knew it wouldn't be that simple. The remnants wouldn't let her rewrite their narrative so easily. And the people she used to work for, MI6, the ministry, the guard, they'd do everything in their power to stop her before the truth ever saw daylight. That meant one thing: they'd come for her, both sides. And when they did, she had to be ready. It started sooner than expected. On the 4th night, while Patel and Bayan worked final encryption protocols, Elena slipped out into the rain for a walk, something to clear her mind, to breathe, to remember why she was doing this. But as she turned down a narrow alley in Shoreditch, she felt it, that instinctive tightening in her gut, the shift in the air. Someone was following her. She didn't look back, didn't change pace, just listened, the echo of footsteps, 1 beat behind hers, 2 sets, maybe 3. She turned the corner and ducked into a side passage, narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people. Then she waited. The first man rounded the corner with a suppressed pistol raised. He didn't have time to react before Elena drove her elbow into his throat, twisted his wrist, and sent the weapon skidding across the wet pavement. He collapsed, choking. The second came fast, heavier, more aggressive. She sidestepped the lunge, slammed his head into the brick wall, and swept his legs from under him. The third never entered the alley. Because he didn't need to. "Stand down, Vega," a voice called from the mouth of the passage. "It's over." She froze. The voice was too familiar, too calm. "Major Helena Vega," it repeated. "By order of the Crown and Her Majesty's Intelligence Service, You are under arrest for treason, unlawful possession of classified material, and acts against the state. Three figures stepped into view, tactical gear, MI6 insignia. Leading them was Director Adrian Wolfe, her former superior, her mentor, the man who had recruited her into the Guard. "Put the weapon down," Wolfe said. "Can't do that," she replied, backing deeper into the alley. "You've gone too far, Helena. This isn't justice. This is betrayal." "Betrayal," she spat. "You lied to the world. You let men die for politics. You made me kill for a story you wrote. And now you want to talk about betrayal." Wolfe sighed, almost pitying. "You don't understand the bigger picture." "I understand perfectly," she said. "You built a machine that feeds on silence, and I'm done being its soldier." "Then you leave me no choice." She saw the gesture before she heard the click, a tranquilizer rifle raised from the end of the alley. She moved before they fired, diving behind a dumpster, rolling as the dart hissed past her ear. Two more shots followed. One grazed her shoulder, burning like fire. She stumbled, clutching the wound, forcing herself back onto her feet. The world tilted, her vision blurred. "Don't fight it," Wolfe's voice echoed distantly. "It's over." Her knees buckled, darkness closed in. She woke in chains. The room was cold, sterile, lit by a single fluorescent bulb. Concrete walls, no windows, no clock. A holding cell beneath MI6 headquarters. She recognized the architecture instantly. Wolfe sat across from her, a folder in his lap. "Do you know how many lives you're putting at risk?" he asked quietly. "How many operations will fail if you release those files? How many agents will die?" "Maybe they should," she said, voice hoarse. He stared at her, disappointment etched into every line of his face. "I trained you better than this." "No," she whispered. "You trained me to obey, and that's exactly what got us here." "You're not a hero, Helena. You're a liability. And you're a liar." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then Wolfe stood. "Officially, you'll be charged and tried. Unofficially," he paused, then leaned closer. "There's a deal on the table. Hand over the files, sign a confession, cooperate, and you'll disappear quietly. No trial, no public disgrace. And if I do, then you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell, and the world will never know the truth." He left without another word. The hours that followed blurred into a haze. Interrogations, threats, promises, none of it mattered. Elena had already made her choice. But then, late into the night, the door to her cell opened again. It was Wolfe this time. It was Patel. His face was pale, eyes wide. "Don't speak," he whispered, slipping a small device into her palm. "EMP pulse, fry the locks for 60 seconds. That's all we've got." "Where buyin'?" she asked. "On the outside, running interference, but we don't have long. Once this goes off, every alarm in the building will trip." She stared at the device, her only chance. If she stayed, the files would die with her. If she ran, the entire operation would spiral into open war. But deep down, there was no real choice. "For the truth," she whispered, pressing the trigger. The lights died instantly. Sirens wailed. The cell door hissed open. They moved fast, sprinting through shadowed corridors, dodging security patrols, bypassing biometric locks. It was a blur of adrenaline and instinct, until they burst through a service exit into the cold, wet night. Rain soaked her face as they ran into the alley beyond. Distant shouts echoed from the compound. Searchlights cut across the rooftops, but they were out. Free. For now. By dawn, they were ghosts again, deep underground, moving between safe houses, ditching devices, burning IDs. Elena's shoulder throbbed, her body ached, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. Operation Mirror was still alive. But now the stakes had changed. The state was hunting her. The remnants were hunting her. And the entire world was about to learn the secrets both sides had tried so desperately to hide. As she stared at the final server countdown, 6 days, 14 hours, 23 minutes, Elena felt something she hadn't in years. Not fear, not guilt, purpose, the kind that burned brighter than orders, louder than loyalty. And for the first time since Damascus, she felt like she was fighting for something that mattered. The city felt different when you were being hunted. Every corner, every passing face, every shadow that lingered too long near a doorway, they all seemed sharper, heavier, threaded with hidden danger. Elena had lived through ambushes and assassinations before, but this was different. This time the enemy wasn't an insurgent force or a faceless militant cell. It was everyone. The state, the remnants, the media, even the public she was trying to protect. "They're closing the net," Patel said quietly, hunched over a flickering laptop in the dim glow of an abandoned warehouse. "Facial recognition hits on CCTV, traffic checkpoints on all major exits, satellite sweeps every 6 hours. "And the remnants?" Elena asked, not looking up from the map spread across the floor. "Worse, they've leaked fake sightings of you in 3 countries, confusion tactics, and there's chatter about a bounty, 7 figures, dead or alive." Bayan let out a low whistle. "Guess we're popular." Elena didn't smile. "It means we're close. They wouldn't be panicking if we were." The countdown on Patel's encrypted server read, 5 days, 19 hours, 7 minutes. That was how long they had until the entire archive, every classified file, every buried operation, every secret that had been weaponized to control and deceive, went live. But releasing the data wasn't enough. Elena knew that now. If she simply dumped the files online, they'd be dismissed as fabrications, labeled as propaganda, buried under denials and counter-narratives. The truth would drown before it ever saw the light. They needed context, witnesses, proof, faces and names that couldn't be ignored. That meant going back to the people who'd been silenced, the ones who'd paid the price for telling the truth. And it meant returning to the one place Elena swore she'd never set foot in again. They called it Station Grey, a forgotten listening post in the north of England, long decommissioned, now used as a holding facility for high-value political prisoners. One of those prisoners was a woman named Dr. Isla Monroe, a former intelligence analyst who, in 2017, had uncovered evidence of illegal operations in Eastern Europe and tried to blow the whistle. She was arrested under the Espionage Act and hadn't been seen since. "She's the missing piece," Elena said, tracing a line on the map toward the bleak coastline where Station Grey stood. "If she speaks, they can't deny what we're releasing." "Grey's a fortress," Bayan warned. "You're talking about walking straight into the lion's mouth." "Not walking," Elena corrected, "breaking in." They moved at night. The rain had returned, soaking the jagged cliffs that rose above the North Sea. Cold wind howled across the desolate landscape as they approached the perimeter fence. Cameras swept in silent arcs. Drones buzzed overhead like mechanical hornets. "This is suicide," Bayan muttered, adjusting the signal jammer on his vest. "No," Elena whispered, "this is necessary." They split into positions, Patel handling the drone interference from a ridge to the east, Bayan cutting a path through the electrified fence. Elena slipped through the gap and crawled across the wet earth toward the compound walls. Every movement was a memory: Damascus rooftops, Kabul alleyways, Mosul ruins. But this time the enemy wasn't a foreign threat. It was home. They breached the outer layer with surgical precision, bypassing sensors, disabling locks, sliding past patrol routes timed down to the second. Elena's heart hammered as they entered the lower cell blocks. Room 12B, that was where Monroe was kept. The door wasn't guarded. That unsettled her more than if it had been. She entered quietly, pistol raised, and froze. The woman inside was thinner than Elena remembered. Her once bright eyes were hollow, her hair streaked with silver. But when she looked up, something still burned in them, something that hadn't been broken. "You're late," Monroe rasped. Elena blinked. "You knew I was coming." "I hoped," Monroe said. "After they took you off the roster, I knew it was only a matter of time before you saw what they really are." "We're releasing everything," Elena said quickly. "The world's going to know the truth, but we need you to speak. You're the proof they can't erase." Monroe's lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite disbelief. "You think the truth is enough?" "It has to be." "No," she whispered. "It's not. They don't fear the truth, Elena. They fear what people do with it. That's why they built this prison. Not to silence us, to make the world forget we ever mattered." Elena stepped closer, lowering her weapon. "Then help me make them remember." Monroe's gaze softened. "Get me out of here." The exfiltration was chaos. An alarm tripped in the lower sector. Maybe a motion sensor they'd missed. Maybe someone got lucky on patrol. Sirens screamed through the corridors as red lights bathed the halls in hellish color. "Contact West Stairwell," Bayan shouted over the comms. 2 minutes, Patel's voice crackled. "I can jam the response teams for 2 minutes tops." That was all they needed. They moved like ghosts, swift, silent, relentless. Monroe stumbled at first, her muscles weak from years of confinement, but Elena supported her with one arm and fired with the other. By the time they reached the outer wall, spotlights were cutting through the rain. Helicopter blades thundered above. "Extraction points blown," Bayan yelled. "We need a new route." "There isn't one," Patel said. "We're boxed in." Elena looked up. The cliff edge was only 30 meters away. Beyond it, the raging sea. "Jump," she said. "Are you insane?" Bayan stared at her. "It's the only way." They didn't hesitate. One by one, they leapt into the storm, plunging into icy darkness as gunfire erupted above them. The current tore at their limbs, the waves smashed against their bodies, but they kicked, fought, clawed their way toward the distant shore. By the time they reached the rocky beach, bruised and gasping, the facility was already swarming with response teams. But it didn't matter. They had what they came for. They had Monroe. 3 days. That was all the time left. 3 days until Operation Mirror went live. Monroe's testimony was recorded in a single sitting. 5 hours of damning evidence, names, dates, and details no one could fabricate. She spoke not just of corruption and cover-ups, but of the machinery that sustained them, the quiet deals, the media manipulations, the calculated distractions. "They built a reality," Monroe said, staring into the camera lens. "And then they built a prison to keep anyone from questioning it." The video would be released alongside the files, and when it did, the story would change forever. But Elena knew the final battle hadn't come yet. The remnants were still silent, too silent, and silence in her experience was never a good sign. It came on the second night before the release. The first explosion hit their safe house at 02:14, a concussive blast that blew out windows and hurled Patel across the room. The second followed seconds later, ripping through the alley outside. "Ambush," Bayan shouted, dragging Monroe toward the rear exit. Gunfire erupted from every angle, disciplined, coordinated, professional. These weren't bounty hunters or mercenaries. This was a strike team. "They found us," Patel groaned, clutching his bleeding side. "Move," Elena ordered. They fought their way through the narrow corridors, trading fire with unseen attackers, every step a desperate gamble. Smoke filled the air. Walls collapsed around them. By the time they reached the street, Patel was barely conscious. Bayan was out of ammunition, and Elena's shoulder burned from a fresh graze. A black van screeched to a halt at the corner. Doors slammed open. Figures in tactical gear poured out. "Hands where I can see them," a voice roared. Elena raised her weapon instead. "Vega," the voice warned, Don't make this worse. It's already worse, she hissed, firing. The fight was brutal and short. They were outnumbered, outgunned, outmaneuvered. One by one, they were forced to the ground, Patel unconscious, Bayan pinned, Monroe screaming as she was dragged toward a waiting vehicle. Elena struggled against two soldiers holding her down, but the butt of a rifle slammed into her jaw, sending darkness cascading over her vision. The last thing she saw before it swallowed her completely was Monroe being taken. She awoke in a moving van, wrists zip-tied, head pounding. Bayan was beside her, bloodied but alive. Patel wasn't there. Neither was Monroe. "Where are they taking us?" Bayan whispered. "I don't know," Elena said, but she knew who had them, the remnants. They hadn't just found them. They'd been waiting, watching, letting them get close enough to the finish line and then striking when it would hurt the most. The files were still on encrypted timers. The drop couldn't be stopped. But without Monroe, without context, they'd be discredited before the first headline even appeared. The mission wasn't over, but they were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. And time was running out. As the van roared through the night, Elena stared at the floor, blood dripping from her split lip. For the first time, doubt crept in. Maybe Wolf had been right. Maybe this wasn't justice. Maybe it was chaos. But then she remembered Monroe's words. They don't fear the truth. They fear what people do with it. And in that moment, her resolve hardened again. She wasn't done, not yet. She had 5 people left to save, 1 mission to finish, and 3 days until the world changed forever. The remnants thought they'd broken her. They had no idea what was coming. The van stopped moving just before dawn. Elena didn't see where they were. The windows were blacked out, the air thick with damp and diesel. But the second the doors opened, the smell told her enough. Sea salt, oil, and iron. A dock, remote, industrial, far from the eyes of anyone who might care. Rough hands dragged her and Bayan out, zip ties biting into their wrists. A hood was thrown over her head. Footsteps echoed on metal as they were marched forward, down steps, through corridors. Someone punched her in the gut when she stumbled. Another kicked the back of her knee when she hesitated. Finally they stopped. The hood was yanked off. The room was dim, a warehouse maybe, or a converted storage chamber. Chains hung from the ceiling. Floodlights glared into her eyes. And standing in the center, flanked by armed men, was a woman Elena recognized immediately. Marin Voss. Former intelligence officer, architect of the remnants, once a ghost story whispered in war rooms, now very, very real. "Helena Vega," Voss said with a thin smile, "I've heard so much about you." "Wish I could say the same," Elena muttered. "Oh, I think you know me," Voss replied, circling her slowly. "You were one of the weapons they built. I was one of the hands that built them. And now here we are, both discarded by the same machine." Voss stopped, her eyes gleaming with something colder than hatred, something like understanding. "You and I are not so different," she continued. "Both betrayed, both seeking justice." "Justice?" Elena spat. "You're killing innocents, you're destabilizing governments, you're starting wars in the shadows." "And what do you think your government did?" Voss snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. "How many operations did you run that left mothers burying empty coffins? How many lies did you protect because they told you it was for the greater good?" Elena didn't respond, because part of her, a part she hated, knew Voss wasn't wrong. "But the difference," Voss said, softening again, "is that I don't hide behind a flag. I don't pretend morality. I fight for a truth that burns the whole rotten system to the ground." "And rebuild what?" Elena asked quietly. "A world ruled by fear, by chaos. That's not justice, that's vengeance." Voss tilted her head, almost amused. "And you think the truth you're about to unleash will heal the world? It will shatter it. Everything you think you're saving will tear itself apart." "Maybe it has to," Elena said. They brought Monroe in an hour later. She was alive, bruised, shaken, but alive. Patel was with her too, limping but conscious. Voss had them placed across from Elena and Bayan, like pawns in a grotesque game of chess. "This is how it ends," Voss said calmly. "You call off your little crusade, shut down your release, and you all walk away. New lives, new names, freedom." "And if we do?" Bayan asked. "Then I execute her first." Voss pointed at Monroe. "Then him, then you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elena's mind raced. Patel's blood-stained hands, Monroe's terrified eyes, Bayan's clenched jaw. She had sworn never to make this choice again, the impossible one. Lives weighed against ideals. People she cared about against the truth she believed in. "Don't you dare give up," Monroe whispered. "Not now." Elena's throat tightened. "They'll kill you." "Then let them, but let the world see why." Voss rolled her eyes. "Such noble words from a woman who's been locked in a cage for 8 years. You think anyone remembers you? They've already forgotten." "Maybe," Monroe said, "but they'll remember her." Something shifted inside Elena then, something steady, cold, irrevocable. She looked Voss dead in the eyes. "I'm not stopping it." Voss sighed. "I was hoping you'd say that." The first gunshot echoed like thunder. But it didn't hit Monroe. It hit the guard closest to Elena, a bullet through the throat, sudden and precise. Chaos erupted, shouts, screams, gunfire rattling off metal walls. Bayan lunged at the nearest attacker, headbutting him and grabbing his rifle. Patel ducked behind a crate, kicking a fallen pistol toward Elena. She snatched it mid-roll, firing twice into the advancing silhouettes. "What the hell?" Bayan shouted. "External breach," Patel yelled. "We've got company." The warehouse doors exploded inward as tactical units stormed in, but not MI6, not remnants, another group entirely. British Special Forces. Elena recognized the insignia instantly, and leading them, barking orders, was a man she hadn't expected to see again. "Director Wolf." "Vega," he shouted, "on me." She hesitated for half a heartbeat, then grabbed Monroe's arm and pulled her toward the exit. Patel and Bayan followed, firing cover shots as the firefight engulfed the chamber. "Why are they here?" Bayan shouted. "They're not here for us," Elena yelled back. "They're here for her." Voss was gone, slipped into the chaos, a phantom in the smoke. The team extracted by helicopter as the facility burned behind them. Elena sat silent on the ride back, soaked in blood, sweat, and rain, her mind a storm of conflict. Wolf sat across from her, helmet off, his expression unreadable. "You should have told me," he said finally. "You would have stopped me," she replied. "Damn right I would have." They stared at each other for a long time. No more lies, no more deceptions, just the weight of everything that had been broken between them. "You know they're going to spin this," Wolf said quietly. "Make you the villain, call you a traitor, a terrorist." "Then let them," Elena said. "I'd rather be hated for telling the truth than remembered for hiding it." Day 0. The files went live at 07:00 GMT. For 30 minutes nothing happened, then the storm hit. Newsrooms erupted, parliaments froze, governments scrambled to contain the fallout as decades of buried operations surfaced into public view, leaked memos, covert funding trails, false flag missions, the names of politicians who had built careers on lies. And in the middle of it all, Monroe's testimony. The video spread like wildfire. Her words, raw and unpolished, reached hundreds of millions within hours. People took to the streets. Protests ignited across capitals. Investigations were launched. Arrests were made. But not everyone saw Elena as a hero. Some called her a traitor, a saboteur, a danger to national security. The remnants released their own version of the story, twisting the leaks to justify their cause. Chaos spread like a virus. And yet, for the first time in her life, Elena didn't feel like she was hiding. Weeks passed. Elena lived in shadows again, not as an operative but as a fugitive. The government wanted her. The remnants wanted her. But among the people, the ordinary men and women who now questioned everything, she had become something else. A ghost. A symbol. A reminder. One rainy afternoon she stood alone on a bridge overlooking the Thames. No weapons, no mission, just the hum of the city around her, uncertain, angry, awake. Patel had disappeared to South America. Bayan was working with journalists, feeding them more evidence. Monroe was testifying before an international tribunal, and Wolf had resigned quietly, his silence speaking louder than any confession. Elena exhaled slowly, watching the rain ripple the water below. It wasn't victory, it wasn't even justice. But it was truth, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. A soft footstep behind her. She didn't turn, didn't need to. The voice that followed was one she'd never forget. "You changed the game," Marin Voss said, standing a few feet away. "I exposed it," Elena replied. Voss smiled faintly. "And now, what will you do, Helena Vega, when the world you've woken up decides it doesn't like what it sees?" "Then I'll keep fighting," Elena said. "Not for governments, not for revenge, for them." She gestured toward the city, the people, the noise, the messy, imperfect heartbeat of a nation grappling with the weight of its own lies. Voss studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Perhaps we'll meet again, on the same side or opposite ends." And just like that, she vanished into the rain. The sun broke through the clouds a few minutes later, pale and fragile, but there. Elena stood there until the light touched her face. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe. The world was still broken, still dangerous, still corrupt, but it was also awake. And sometimes she realized that was enough. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in the silence that followed, Elena Vega walked away. Not as a soldier, not as a spy, not as a ghost. But as a woman who had finally, irrevocably, chosen to stand on the side of truth.